A slideshow. Slide, feedback, and polling. A bullet point list. Karen Hoskins appears on a video call at the top right-hand corner of the slideshow.
We also, before we get started, want to do a Mentimeter poll. Polling provides insight into what you, the audience, think about the topics related to this session.
Slide, welcome back day 2.
So we're bringing up our first Mentimeter poll.
Slide, a question.
So what is one word that describes your reaction to the recent NAR settlement? Just thinking about it, there's been a lot of conversation on the community board about the NAR settlement. What word comes to mind for you when you think about it?
Words appear on the slide.
Okay, we're seeing worried, skeptical, disturbing, unsure, confused, uncertainty. And this certainly speaks to why we're having this conversation, to address some of these concerns. Somebody said implementation. How do you actually implement some of this? Unfair, unclear. Okay, and this is helpful for for the conversation today, just to know where the mindset is of the audience as we go into this conversation. So thank you for that. Hopefully by the conclusion, some of this will have changed in terms of what your concerns are. Okay, thank you for that. And then we have a second question.
Slide, a question.
What are your hopes for the Appraisal Foundation bring additional appraisers into the industry? This is going to be part of the conversation today as well. But part of the goal of the Appraisal Foundation is to provide new opportunities, particularly for persons of color, to become appraisers. So based on what you know right now, if there were to be additional appraisers, again, particularly appraisers of color coming into the industry, what are your hopes for that?
Words and phrases appear.
Unbiased assessments. Okay. Certainly, there have been a lot of conversation about appraisal discrimination. So this is an attempt to address some of that. Folks are elated. More equity in BIPOC sellers, for BIPOC sellers. Efficient service, okay. Equitable appraisals, it's great. No bias. Make it cheaper and faster. Optimistic about less racial bias. Okay, great. Again, we'll be taking a deep dive on some of these issues today, and we hope that you find it informative.
Slide, speakers. A bullet point list.
So our speakers are David Berenbaum. He'll be leading this conversation. Again, we all know David. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Housing Counseling. Brian Green is here. He's the Vice President, Policy Advocacy with the National Association of Realtors, or NAR. Dr. Courtney Johnson Rose is President, National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And Kelly Davids is President of the Appraisal Foundation. So we are looking forward to a rich conversation. So at this time, I'll like to turn things over to David Berenbaum to get the conversation started.
The slideshow disappears. The speakers appear on a video call.
Thank you, Karen. And these are both very serious topics that we're going to be discussing this afternoon to kick off day 2 of the conference. As a result of recent lawsuits and pending settlements regarding how consumers purchase and sell residential real estate, new guidance, policy, and practice changes have been developed by the National Association of Realtors, which are also now being examined by the United States Department of Justice. The guidance, policies, and practices took effect on August 17th of this year, but the process of implementation will vary from state to state depending on state law, multiple listing service policies and regulations, and how each realtor board implements the policies for their members. On one hand, some have argued that this would promote transparency and competition, while on the other hand, many are concerned that this will negatively impact the ability of low to moderate income households to realize first-time homeownership or first-generation homeownership in their search for the American dream. The Office of Housing Counseling's Federal Advisory Committee created a subcommittee to look at this issue. And in fact, at our recent meeting in Norfolk, Virginia on September 11th, the committee unanimously passed a series of 7 recommendations for HUD's consideration. I'd like to share those with everyone before we begin our discussion. First, the Housing Counseling Federal Advisory Committee recommends that the Office of Housing Counseling encourage stakeholder engagement and collaboration, including organizations such as the National Housing Resource Center, the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, and the Asian Real Estate Association of America, as well as the National Mortgage Bankers Association, the Coalition of HUD Intermediaries, and others. Second, the committee recommended that the Office of Housing Counseling create an online resource center on the HUD Exchange where all best practices, guidance documents, FAQs, and additional resources can be accessed by housing counselors and consumers. Third, the committee recommended that the Office of Housing Counseling develop training, meetings, and/or webinars to ensure that HUD certified housing counselors are fluent on the new standards. Fourth, the committee recommended that the Office of Housing Counseling incorporate the new standards into the pending update to the housing counseling best practices. Fifth, the committee recommends that the Office of Housing Counseling engage with stakeholders to regularly update its industry and educational initiative. Six, the committee recommends that the Office of Housing Counseling collaborate with HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity to ensure that every consumer can purchase the home of their choice in a marketplace free of discrimination. And finally, the committee recommended that the Office of Housing Counseling consider the creation of an education and outreach campaign for housing counselors to educate consumers in conjunction with industry trade association. I'd like to invite Dr. Courtney Johnson-Rose, president of NARAB, and Brian Green to join us for our conversation now. Dr. Rose, welcome. Brian, welcome. I'd like to invite each of you to share what you believe are some of the key takeaways for our housing counseling audience today, and what they should know and what they should feel that should be shared with their clients across the country moving forward. Brian, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, David. And let me just say at the outset, you provided a fantastic summary of how this came about and how we are to navigate this going forward. And I also want to say that the Federal Advisory Committee, or the subcommittee, has done a wonderful job in trying to provide resources that people can refer to going forward. First, people refer to this as the NAR settlement. Let me say that I haven't come up with an alternate name for it, but I do want to underscore that this was not something that we sought, right? We were content with the real estate practices that have made the American home ownership the envy of the world, with 65% of Americans owning homes. And the landscape till now has benefited many Americans, helping many enter the middle class. It is more challenging going forward, but we are doing everything we can to help navigate or help consumers navigate that. Let me stress that the biggest changes that have occurred now is that the commission that a listing agent and seller may be offering a buyer's agent can no longer be on the multiple listing service, meaning that a buyer's agent helping a consumer cannot find now on the multiple listing services what fee will be paid, what the compensation would be for that buyer's agent. So that's one major change. And the second is that consumers, when they begin to work with a buyer's agent, will now sign with that agent a buyer's agreement, a buyer's agency agreement. And that will detail what services will be provided at what cost. And the goal of that in this settlement is to provide transparency. So in the past, where a seller would have been offering the compensation, and where that compensation rate, while negotiable, would have been decided between the seller and their listing agent. And now the buyer's agency agreement has the buyer negotiating what that agent will be compensated at. And so the goal is to put the buyer more in the driver's seat there. I think one of the big challenges that many have cited is that the buyer may now come out of pocket to pay their buyer's agent, and that amount would be on top of their closing costs and down payment, et cetera. I think there's some fallacy out there that sellers who decline to pay the buyer's agent commission would discount their home prices and pass on savings, therefore, to the buyer. But one, even if they did discount, the buyer is paying still, so it's not really a discount. But two, I think in this market, the challenge is going to be that sellers are going to be able to get the price of their home, and so the buyer will be buying a home at asking price or potentially more, and also will have to make a determination whether they want to ask the seller to pay their buyer's agent or whether they want to pay that out of pocket. And so that's going to be the challenge, I think, that housing counselors will have to work through, and buyer's agents will have to work through, whether or not the home buyer is prepared to pay out of pocket or would be limiting their search to those properties where the seller will be paying. And you're going to be in competition with other buyers who might be paying out of pocket. So those are I think, the sticking points going forward for many buyers and for housing counselors, how to advise the buyer, how to prepare the buyer for those different circumstances.
Thank you, Brian. Dr. Rose, please.
Thank you so much. And this is such an important topic. I want to thank HUD for providing this important forum for us today. Thank you to Acting Secretary Adrian Topman, and thank you to you, David Bourbon, our Deputy Assistant Secretary for Housing Counseling. So the real estate industry is changing. That's the name of our segment today, because it is. Just to echo Brian's point, there has been many recent lawsuits, now a settlement around buyer's agency commission. And the summation, in my opinion, is that, the real estate commission for the agent that represents the buyer will be negotiable per transaction, which technically was always the case, but now that commission will no longer be advertised through the MLS system. So from a NARAB perspective, and we are a network of Black real estate professionals founded in 1947, in the Trade Association for Black Real Estate Professionals, and that includes housing counselors through our NID Housing Counseling affiliate. Black appraisers are part of our network. Black brokers, Black agents, Black property managers, and Black developers are all part of the NARAB, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers network. So we have two major concerns with the settlement and the changes in the industry. Our first concern, David, is around Black consumers. Of course, that's who we serve. That's our clientele. And our second concern, obviously, is for Black real estate professionals, as the organization and the trade associations for Black real estate professionals. So first, I want to talk about the implications to the Black real estate professionals. In many cases, our clientele, Black consumers who traditionally, due to systematic racism, don't have an overabundance of funds for closing. In one of the panels yesterday, the assessment was that the average cost for a first-time home buyer to purchase in this market is about $25,000. So we're working with buyers that are already burdened with coming up with that average of $25,000. And now we're going to add an additional expense of commission to their burden. And we feel like that's problematic. Particularly with this particular demographic that, again, is already, in many cases, having difficulty to come up with the adequate funds to close. So this jeopardizes Black professionals who service this clientele and our ability to earn a commission, which in turn is our ability to make a living and survive in this industry. So we are afraid at NARAB that we will lose Black real estate professionals who feel like they cannot survive in the industry due to the burden of commission. And many times, in many cases, that will be shifted to the buyer versus what traditionally would have been with the seller. The implications on Black consumers are potentially detrimental as well. We anticipate many Black consumers will forego representation due to the additional cost burden. And unfortunately, Black consumers who are more likely to be first-time buyers, first-generation buyers with no prior experience with real estate. In many cases, they'll be the first in their family to buy real estate. So there's no family previous experience also to glean from, which means actually they need representation more than anyone else because of those factors. But unfortunately, we are nervous that many of them will not access it because of costs. We also see potential increases in predatory lending practices in Black communities. It's a fact that predatory lenders target Black communities more than any other community. And with inexperienced buyers, first-time home buyers that do not have a real estate professional partnered with them, we are nervous about increase of predatory lending practices against African Americans. We are nervous about African Americans, buyers not being able to compete without the help of savvy real estate professionals. We have a problem in our country that more than 20 to 25% of our market last year in major cities were purchased by institutionalized investors. It's very difficult for first-time buyers to compete against institutional investors. It's even more difficult for them to compete against institutionalized investors without representation. So we see buyers not being able to locate properties and not being able to close because of how competitive this market is, particularly without adequate representation. We see potential fair housing violations, more pocket listings. I want to sell my house. Let me call a realtor to sell my house as a pocket listing because we are diminishing the value that the MLS has by this settlement. So what happens now? I called a realtor, neighborhood realtor, sell my home. The home never hits the open market. The home never hits the MLS system. The realtor just works within their network to sell the home to someone in their network, and a broad, diverse group of buyers is never exposed to the listing and aware that it's even for sale. We see that as a problem in terms of discrimination and fair housing. So ultimately, the ramifications could lead to a decrease in minority homeownership if we are not diligent. And that's why the work of housing counselors is key to ensure minority buyers still have counseling and consultation on the most expensive investment that they will ever make in their life. At the end of the day, we cannot let this slow down. We have to prepare the buyers. We have to inspire them. We have to motivate them. We have to counsel them to still buy real estate because it's the best investment that they can make, especially for low to moderate income communities, especially for minority buyers that are trying to build wealth. We have to be even more diligent as counselors and real estate professionals to help them continue to buy homes.
Courtney, thank you for your candor, and I appreciate also your recognition of the importance of housing counselors as
Yes.
trusted advisors and advocates in the purchase of a home moving forward. Brian, I'd like to invite you to respond to some of the points that Dr. Rose made, and as well, let me also express my appreciation, both NAR and NARAB, for your engagement with us in the development of our recommended best practices as we move forward. Brian, please. You're muted, Brian.
Yes, well, thank you, David. Well, as you know, I spent most of my career in fair housing. At HUD, I oversaw HUD's Office of Fair Housing as its career leader. And the fair housing concerns, fair housing implications of the settlement are among our major concerns because, yes, this may mean that the consumers who have the least wherewithal to pay out of pocket for buyer's agent services, and as Dr. Johnson Rose said, the ones who most need representation could be disadvantaged here. One of the things I do want to highlight is that while the commission offers cannot be on the multiple listing services anymore, it was very important to the National Association of Realtors that we preserve the opportunity for brokerages, sellers to advertise compensation offers off the multiple listing service. So a brokerage can still indicate on their website or in other places what commissions they will be providing for buyers. And we do believe that for buyers agents, we do believe that many sellers want to do that because they want maximum exposure and maximum interest in the property, and they know that this would attract more buyers. But it is a challenge, and I think the concern is that you once had one central place where this information would be listed, which allowed for transparency and consistency. The plaintiffs, in this litigation, and likewise the Department of Justice and the Consumer Federation of America, when they talk about these issues, they place a premium on the individual negotiation, which you could always do, but really for each transaction to be different. And I think the concern that many people of color have is they want to make sure when they're going into the transaction, they know what the expectations are in terms of what kind of offers the sellers are going to make to the buyer's agents. So yeah, a lot of this negotiation now is going to be a sort of a thousand flowers blooming, but we and housing counselors all need to work together to make sure we understand what the new real estate practices are. I want to underscore that because listing forms are different in different communities, it's really important for housing counselors and local real estate associations to be working together to be sure everyone is on the same page in terms of what the real estate laws are in that community and what the listing forms and the buyer's agency agreements look like in those communities.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to invite our audience, all of our housing counselors and other housing finance and real estate professionals who have joined us today. If you have any questions or thoughts, to please put them onto the Q&A chat box. And I want to thank Dr. Rose and Mr. Green, Brian Green. We're gonna move forward to our discussion on valuation, but then bring our experts back for Q&A. So I'd like to invite Kelly Davids to join me now, and just a little background on the valuation issue before we dive in with Ms. Davids. First, of course, I think everyone is very familiar with all our work on the PAVE initiative on an interagency basis. We've been working to educate housing counselors nationwide in conjunction with HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. But as well, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development announced on July 11th of this year that it entered into a conciliation agreement with the Appraisal Foundation. Now, of course, most of you are aware the foundation is responsible for training and the setting of standards, the qualifications for real estate appraisers, in providing guidance on valuation issues with all industry professionals. The agreement resolved what was a secretary-initiated complaint against the Appraisal Foundation, but it is quite precedential. Under the terms of the agreement, the foundation will establish a $1.2 million scholarship fund, which will be utilized to cover the cost of aspiring appraisers to attend practical applications of real estate appraisal programs, or what's called PARIA. The PARIA program is designed to provide an alternative pathway to fulfill the experience requirements to become a licensed appraiser, and it is done with an affirmative effort in mind to ensure diversity in future appraisals and the professionals who provide those appraisals, and to ensure that we have a diverse group of professionals who are knowledgeable about every community that they serve. So, Kelly, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts about where we are today, about the role of housing counselors moving forward, and frankly, how we can engage the next generation of appraisers. I mean, I know so often housing counselors become real estate professionals. There may be some in this very audience thinking about becoming valuation professionals. Kelly, welcome and thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It is an absolute honor to be here. Thank you, David, and everyone at OHC for making this connection happen. And I also, as I start, want to give hats off to the Biden administration. They brought the national heat to valuation issues being seen in communities of color, illuminated things that really hadn't been illuminated before. Building on those media reports, those concerns were significant. And appraisers who are intellectually curious problem solvers and worked with all of our stakeholders to roll up their sleeves and really excel what they had begun in 2020 to start to do what we could do to bring more diversity into this profession and answer some of these concerns that were out there. So what is the foundation? You did touch on it a little bit. We are a not-for-profit organization made up of 110 affiliated organizations, an organization of organizations. And we set the appraiser qualification standards, and our board set the standards of practice called the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice that all appraisers must abide by. And when Congress gave us that authority to set those standards and qualifications for those doing federally related transactions, they didn't give us enforcement authority, but they gave us the ability to provide the regulators with what they needed. So after the PAVE task force, the appraisal subcommittee report, and even during the HUD investigation, we really decided we needed to really increase the pace of our work. And all of those things came down to like three broad areas. I just want to talk about three broad areas. So first was enforcement. So the regulators made it clear they needed stronger tools. They needed stronger tools to take care of violations, not only of USPAP, the uniform standards, but also made those uniform standards had to be crystal clear that violations of the Fair Housing Act were also violations of the uniform standard. So working with Realm and Colfax, our board developed the new non-discrimination section of the ethics rule within USPAP that is being in place today and being enforced today. So I want to say to housing counselors, if you look as the appraisers that do the appraisals for those that you are helping purchase a home, make certain that they've got the new training that comes with the uniform standards. Those appraisers who are practicing under the uniform standards and are following the uniform standards can absolutely be trusted by your clients to give independent, objective, impartial opinions of value that are free of bias. That's so important here in our world. The next thing we looked at was education. That's a big area. Fair housing education had always been an option, and in all the optional courses that appraisers could take as they were getting licensed or credentialed. It's a mandatory requirement now. All appraisers need to really understand the history of how we got here, the history of federal government pushing redlining, et cetera, and how that impacts valuation today. We need to learn from those lessons of the past, really keep those in mind and make certain that they don't creep into appraisal practice. So this new fair housing and valuation bias will be required not only of new appraisers, but also current appraisers, and then renewed every 4 years. So it's going to be ongoing, continual reminder. Do not let any valuation bias creep into your practice. And the third big area is engagement, right? Engagement is so important. And there is just an exciting amount of engagement going on in the appraisal profession and across all of our stakeholders today. I could not be more thrilled. One of the things that the foundation did immediately was look at our boards and our governance structure. We made sweeping changes. And now instead of one required consumer advocate on our board of trustees, it's unlimited. But we are up to 15% of our board is now consumer advocates, civil rights, fair housing advocates. So we're really excited to get those perspectives at our table, really informing everything that we do. We have our new Council to Advance Residential Equity. Big shout out to David Young and Lee Lester, who are represent two of our organizations on our CARE Council. They're being panelists for you during this conference. So everybody who's listening in, make certain that you listen in for David and Lee's sessions. Those two people and everyone on CARE are brilliant. I love them to pieces. There are 14 organizations that are committed to CARE right now. It's unlimited. We welcome all of you, all of your organizations. If you'd like to impact the future evaluation, come on in. The next thing that I'm so thrilled about is the next generation of appraisers. There are numerous entities working within our big umbrella on bringing in the next generation. So people say we touched a little bit about PAREA. David, you talked a little bit about a PAREA. That is the new practical applications of real estate appraisal. It is simulated experience training for those who want to aspire to be appraisers, may not be able to find a supervisor. You can do it from the comfort of your home and still have that connection with a mentor. So PAREA is available and on the street now. There are practicum courses, a different way. It's like, think of a college course with a lab, right? We all did those kinds of courses in college. And this lab work is a different way that you can get that experience that you need in order to become an appraiser. And then you did mention that the PAREA scholarships, we were thrilled beyond belief to get past the HUD investigation. No offense, but I wouldn't wish that sort of rooting through every single one of your drawers on my worst enemy, but it made us stronger. So at the end of the day, we are a stronger organization, and we were so thrilled that those HUD findings found no findings and recognized all the many things that the foundation is doing. But now, instead of paying attorneys, we can pay scholarships. So that money is going into that $1.22 million fund that will provide scholarships for aspiring appraisers to get their experience through that PAREA module. But what brings me the most joy is all of the initiatives across the space of people collaborating and working together to bring in the next generation. People like the Appraiser Diversity Initiative, which is a collaboration of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Appraisal Institute, and the National Urban League to bring in that next generation. At the NFREA, my new good friend, Dr. Rose at NARAB, and others working with HBCUs and Fort Liberty and other veterans, people who are bringing up veterans to come into the profession. We've got state appraiser coalitions providing supervisors to new trainees, and there's just so much energy that I'm certain that we're going to make the turn that we need to make. So
Thank you.
I know I only had it a few minutes. I tried to keep it into 10, but David, I'm just so excited about the future of the appraisal profession and all the opportunities we have to work together.
Yeah, it's really exciting to hear all the developments with regard to governance and engaging stakeholders and, of course, our colleagues in the housing counseling community. Like Brian, my roots are in the fair housing movement for my career. And I simply have to acknowledge here we are in 2024. I mean, and the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. And the theme of this entire conversation, not just in valuation, but also as we're talking about this recent settlement, is still about ensuring that people have the opportunity of all diverse backgrounds to realize homeownership as a means of entering the middle class, as a means of creating intergenerational wealth, and ensuring as well that equal housing opportunity is the best practice, the rule of law, the simply embraced by all in our nation. I applaud what is happening here. And of course, I understand HUD conciliations, investigations are painful, but I think about the millions of Americans who want to enjoy home ownership in an environment free from discrimination. And Dr. Rose, I invite you to jump in. I celebrate your collaboration with the Appraisal Foundation.
Yes.
Your thoughts here.
Yes, well, again, another important topic, David, that we are so happy and excited to comment on. So NARAB, we are the real estate professionals. So we have known that this problem has existed for years, and we're so glad that it's on the forefront now. As real estate practitioners, we're the ones that have to tell our clients to take down their photos of their parents and their children's, to take down their diploma that they work so hard to obtain from a historically Black college or university, and to really depersonalize their home in order to sell it at the value that it's worth. And in many cases, depending on the community, we as Black real estate professionals were not hired because sellers were afraid that if they have a Black real estate professional, it will decrease their value because that's an indication that they are probably a Black seller. So we as realtors are very familiar with the issue. We're excited about the work of the Appraisal Foundation, the work that Kelly and her team are doing and the strides that are being made. But despite the clear evidence of the damaging impacts of appraisal bias, Black professionals remain starkly underrepresented in the appraisal industry. Data from the Appraisal Institute indicates that less than 2% of appraisers nationwide are Black. And this lack of diversity, we feel, David, contributes to the biases in property valuations, as appraisers may inadvertently project their own racial and geographic biases into appraisal decisions. Research suggests that increasing diversity within the appraisal workforce is the most critical step towards minimizing these biases, ensuring fair property valuations, and fostering equity in housing. With that in mind, NARAB has introduced the NARAB Black Appraisers Program, an initiative designed to confront and mitigate the detrimental impacts of appraisal bias in the real estate industry. Similar to our transformative NARAB Black Developers Academy, which has made significant strides in diversifying the real estate development sector, we want to do the same in the appraisal industry. And the Black Appraisals Programs aims to increase the representation of Black professionals in the appraisal industry, advocate for fair appraisal practices, and enhance awareness of appraisal bias amongst both consumers and professionals. Partnered with our NARAB affiliate, the National Society of Real Estate Appraisers, NESRA, under the leadership of our affiliate president, Brian Cox, we are looking at how we diversify this industry. We have identified a great pool of potential Black appraisers, which are realtors, members of our organization. We feel like members that are of our organizations that are brokers and agents could make a great pool for recruiting of the next generation of real estate appraisers. Real estate professionals have already taken tests. They understand markets. They understand market analysis. They like real estate. They are committed to the industry. Transferring or having some of them take their career to another level by becoming appraisers, we think is a great pool of Black real estate professionals that could help diversify the industry. Secondly, we want to look at recruiting historically Black college and university students. There's a program that our NESRA affiliate has started at Fayetteville University. We have over 100 Black students on the waiting list for this program to be able to become Black appraisers. We want to duplicate programs like that across the country with HBCUs that we have close relationships with. Lastly, we want to look at how do we make our NESRA members, our Black appraisers, the mentors and apprentices to this industry. Who better to mentor and to train Black appraisers to help them be successful than an existing Black appraiser? But we have to be able to compensate them. It takes money to bring an apprentice into your office. It takes office space. It takes time. It takes computers. We have to be able to incentivize our Black appraisers with resources to be able to actually do this. But we feel like in doing this, it will create a successful transition for a new Black appraiser to be successful in the business. Lastly, David, I want to mention a new white paper report that will be released by NARAB in October, titled Home Appraisals in Black and White: Disparities in Estimated Valuation of Homes by Neighborhood, Racial Composition, and Implications for Racial Wealth Inequity. We decided a few months back to produce a white paper report to support our Black appraisers program. We all knew that it was an issue, but we wanted to look at the problem ourselves from the particular lens that we have as real estate professionals. We're looking at two gaps within our report, which again will be available next month. One is the difference in average and median appraisal values of homes in Black communities with Black consumers. But two, we're looking at the frequency with which there are real estate transactions where appraised homes do not meet the seller's asking or contract sales price in Black versus white communities. So we're looking at the contract price gap when it comes to appraisers, because again, that is something when that home does not appraise, in many cases, those transactions do not happen and we're not able to achieve a new Black homeowner. So we're excited about this white paper being produced and the analysis that it will provide us. But more importantly, it will also provide solutions to how do we continue to diversify the real estate appraisal industry.
Slide Q&A.
Thank you so much. We're going to really look forward to that report. Before we move into question and answer, Brian, I know you have an active professional group of valuation professionals within NAR as well. Is there anything that you'd like to share?
Well, first, I applaud everything that NARAB is doing. No doubt, this is an industry that needs to be more diverse, more representative of America. It is, in some ways, really shocking, the lack of diversity in 2024. But a lot of that is structural. And so I'm pleased to see the Appraisal Foundation recognizing this and taking steps to move forward. And then, beyond that, I would just say that we're very interested in continuing to work with HUD to help better illustrate how appraisal discrimination occurs, what it looks like. We know that there are lots of cases, I understand like 130 or so pending at HUD, filed by consumers. In order for us to better train appraisers, just in the way that lenders have been trained, and sales and rental managers have been trained on what housing discrimination looks like. It will help when we have more adjudications from HUD. One, it'll help those consumers, but it'll also help train the industry.
Thank you, Brian. And let me say that our office is committed to realizing the recommendations of our advisory committee in collaboration with both NAR, NARAP, and all the other groups who have been identified. And we look forward to those conversations collaboratively with you. I also want to share with all the housing counselors the point that Brian just made, and that is, if you have a consumer who you believe has been the victim of valuation discrimination, please reach out to HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, or to a Fair Housing Initiatives program or a local Fair Housing Assistance Program agency, and report that potential act of discrimination for investigation. Karen, I'd like to invite you back to share some of the questions from our audience.
Sure. Thank you, David. We have a number of questions, actually. This first one is, what are the pros or positive aspects, if any, of the NAR settlement for home buyers? Brian, I think that one was for you.
Okay, thanks. Well, again, I'll say that NAR would have been content had nothing changed. And so we weren't looking for this litigation. We weren't looking for what was initially a verdict. And we settled with an eye to preserving what we think is really important. And so I suppose well, first of all, I would say we were served lemons, and we tried to make lemonade in the settlement. And the one thing that was really important to us was to preserve off the MLS the ability for sellers and brokerages to make offers of compensation, so that there would be transparency and consistency, so that consumers, even if it were not in the central place of the multiple listing service, could still find out what a seller is offering as compensation on the sale of a property. And I think that's really important. We're very concerned that the Department of Justice in public statements have said they want that to go away as well. And should that go away, it really is each individual buyer working with their agent making offers unaware of whether the seller would entertain paying the buyer's agent. And so that would make things even more challenging. So it was really important for us to preserve that, and we hope that we can continue to preserve that. And so I really do think that this is a case of us making lemonade out of a really difficult situation.
Okay. And a couple more questions before we move on to the Appraisal Foundation questions that have come in. Someone in the audience wants to know, what guidance should counselors give buyers on negotiating a rate with their agent? Is there a minimum or a maximum commission?
So,
okay.
So this is, I'm sorry, is this for me?
Whoever wants to respond, I defer to David.
So let me say this first. There are some wonderful fact sheets that have become available through the Association of Realtors with regard to what I'll describe how to engage with consumers on this front, and they're very, very helpful. We can place them onto the boards here as well. Dr. Rose, please jump in, and then Brian as well.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in as a real estate broker for the past 24 years and second generation real estate broker. I have lots of opinions on the settlement and whether it's positive or negative. First, I'll answer the question on how to negotiate with your buyer's agent. And the best thing is to have the conversation up front. Let's talk about, what services you need as a consumer, what services can the real estate professional provide, what do they charge for that? I think the best way to approach it is by having those conversations up front as you get the process started, and be able to really understand as the consumer what that real estate professional will be doing on your behalf to help you become a homeowner. But I want to talk a little bit about just the settlement and the timing of it is really interesting. And we've had several conversations with our counterparts at the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, with Gary Acosta, their founder, and also with the Asian Real Estate Association. One of the things that's interesting to us is the timing of this settlement. We're at a time in our history in the country where you look at white homeownership compared to minority homeownership. White homeownership is hovering somewhere around 75, 76%. What that means is that most of white America that's in a position to buy a home, that wants to buy a home, has pretty much achieved that. You'll never achieve 100% home ownership. People get divorced, people move. It's always some fluctuation kind of happening. But for the most part, the majority of that community has become homeowners. So they are effectively the sellers in this scenario. We look at who the buyers are. 45% homeownership in Black community, 49% in the Hispanic community, 54% in the Asian community. So the home buyer of the future in this country are people of color. So now you have the sellers, which we just determined was pretty much white America, doesn't want to pay the buyer's agent, which are representing people of color. That phenomenon for us as Black real estate professionals, Hispanic real estate professionals, Asian real estate professionals is just interesting to us of the timing of this system that has built white home ownership over the past 100 years that wasn't broke before. Now that the pendulum has changed, where the buyers and the sellers and who the buyers are and who the sellers are has changed. Now, all of a sudden, we need an industry shift. We also look at the timing of 20 to 25% of our market is now being purchased by institutionalized entities. And if you take real estate professionals out of the game, what does that do? Who advocates for the buyer? Who fights against this institutionalized buyer that a regular buyer cannot compete with? So we look at Wall Street and the role that they're playing in terms of buying up real estate. And we look at the diminishment of real estate professionals, and we look at the timing of it. And it's just really interesting that all of this is happening now when Black and brown buyers are the home buyer of the future. So just some commentary on the settlement, but it is very interesting the timing that all this is happening in.
Yeah, we often speak about institutionalized forms of racism in our society. It's a
Yeah.
very powerful point that you're making. For our housing counselors, 2 quick points. A buyer broker now will be required to have a retainer with their consumer, their client, at first representation, even if they're interested in looking at a particular home. Now, that agreement may be for a matter of days or a matter of months or a year, but that is a very significant change. And like our discussions with pre-purchase counseling prior to someone going to contract our home or prior to applying for a mortgage, it is critical that we reach our consumers early in this entire process so that we can educate and empower them. Brian, your thoughts here?
Well, I agree. And I think it's really important for housing counselors and their local realtors association, as well as realtors, to be in collaboration. So everyone understands precisely the local real estate laws and, what the buyer's agency agreements look like in that community. So the collaboration is going to be key. I also think the more that can be done to qualify buyers up front, and maybe see what more can be done to qualify buyers to pay more, because there are going to be some situations where buyers are going to want to or need to pay out of pocket to be more competitive. I think that extra work that can be done up front, and however real estate professionals can help with that, will be key. I think the great concern right now is that this may be an additional cost for consumers. I saw one study that said 66% of consumers say that they are unable to pay any additional costs of their existing down payment and cost expectation. So, so in order to be competitive, either folks need to know going in that they're absolutely going to require a seller to pay, whether that's in the form of concessions or an offer, or they're going to need to know how much they contribute to their buyer's agency fee. And I think that's just going to take more work up front. I think many of our real estate professionals in looking at this new landscape expect that they're going to do more work, because some of the information regarding the buyer's agency fee may not be readily available. Let's say if it's on the weekend and someone has seen a home during open house and offers are due in 24 hours, you know, that information regarding what the seller is willing to pay in terms of buyer's agency fees may not be readily available. And so the more prepared a consumer is to be flexible, the better.
Slide, resources. A bullet point list.
Yeah. And an experienced consumer may transactionally be able to negotiate an advantageous price point here. But that, I just want to present this to have a balanced discussion that has been presented. Karen, before we go to resources, though, I'm going to take the liberty of extending our conversation by about 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm sure we had some questions on the valuation side that I'd love to have Kelly respond to.
Great. Thank you, David. Kelly, yes, in the interest of time, though, I'm going to combine two questions, if you don't mind. First, who will oversee and manage enforcement of the new appraisal policies? And secondly, will there be a list of appraisers by state who have taken the training?
Oh, good questions. Okay, so as I said, we don't have enforcement authority, but the federal government has enforcement authority through what's called the appraisal subcommittee that oversees the actions of each state licensing board. So every state has their own licensing and certification board that licenses and certifies appraisers. And if there is a violation of USPAP, including violations of the Fair Housing Act, those state appraiser boards can look into those actions. Additionally, as David mentioned, their office of HUD's office of, I'm sorry, I'm missing the name. The
Fair housing and equal opportunity. There you
I just
go.
have the FHEO. You know, they have investigative staff too who can look into violations. So that's who will be doing the enforcement. Now, as to the education, there's a couple things there. So we immediately within our new, all appraisers have to take what's called a USPAP, 7-hour USPAP update course every 2 years. We immediately put into that 7-hour USPAP course a big chunk. I think it's a 90-minute or so segment on the new non-discrimination section of the ethics rule, and all of the case studies that go with that course involve that application of that non-discrimination section. Every single appraiser that is on the National Registry maintained by the appraisal subcommittee will have to take that course by the end of their education cycle, which is no later than December 31st of next year. In addition to that are the fair housing courses that are going to be mandatory. Now, because state enforce what our standards and qualifications boards do, we have to give them time because many of them have to work with their legislatures to get things adopted.
Slide, resources, continued. A bullet point list.
So at the very latest, those fair housing courses will be required across the country by January 1, 2026. Many states are already implementing those rules right now. I think I answered both questions.
Okay,
any follow-up?
That was great. That was great. Thank you so much. David, any final thoughts before we close?
I'll share that the resource list is wonderful and quite comprehensive, Karen, that I think you were cover, but a lot of the citations for topics and resources that we covered are right there on the links.
Mhm.
And I urge everyone to take the time to really use them and to explore them. And again, our office will be coming out with additional resources. It's our hope to do some joint webinars for the housing counseling community with all of the trade associations represented here and elsewhere,
Okay.
as well as to develop comprehensive consumer information as we move forward for your use.
Fantastic. And I think we have one other slide that shows us what's next.
Slide, upcoming sessions. A table.
So upcoming, thank you. First of all, thank you for this conversation. It's been wonderful. We appreciate our speakers being here, certainly. Just want to make you aware of what's happening for the balance of today at 1:30 Eastern. There's adapting to change, how the homeownership industry is evolving. And then at 3 o'clock, we have concurrent sessions. You have your pick of the intersection of financial education and housing counseling, or counseling strategies for housing choice voucher homeownership program clients. And then we'll close out the day at 4:30 with balancing the professional demands of housing counselors. This is a mental health session that uh, addresses the challenges counselors sometimes have with stress and burnout and that kind of thing. So you don't want to miss that one.
Slide. Thanks for attending. A bullet point list with links. Text, email us at housing.counseling@hud.gov.
So again, thank you so much for attending. Please take advantage of all the resources that are available, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session.
And a special thanks to our speakers. Talk to you all soon. Thank you.